Musculoskeletal health covers two main aspects, our bone health and our muscle health. And as we get older, whether we're male or female, we lose both bone and muscle. If we lose bone to an extent that we can become what's called osteoporotic, so that or have osteoporosis, which is of course basically porous bones. So our bones become very thin, weak, fragile, and likely to fracture on impact. On the other side of that is, of course, muscle health, which is really critical for us to be able to, of course, do all our daily activities. And so if we become weak in our muscles, then we're not able to be as physically active, perhaps, as we would like to do. And so, of course, as we get older, we want to make sure that we keep active and that we don't put ourselves at risk, that if we are to fall over, that our bones would naturally break. The nutrients that are really critical for musculoskeletal health are firstly calcium. Calcium is contained within our bones and of course within our teeth. And we know that if we have a low supply of calcium, that will be detrimental certainly to our bone. When we're growing, we need plenty of calcium, but as we get older, it's vitally important that we keep our calcium intakes to a level that allows our bones to keep healthy. So either ensuring that calcium through dairy products, milk and dairy products, but it's perfectly possible to have a calcium-rich diet following a non-dairy intake. So that would be going to plant-based milks, many of which are now fortified with calcium and indeed vitamin D, but looking at other suppliers of calcium in the body, like your nuts and your seeds, or white flour in the United Kingdom, of course, is fortified with calcium. That was something that came in during the Second World War and has stayed to this day. And looking at other vegetables, for example, green leafy vegetables like broccoli. So calcium would certainly is always considered the number one nutrient for bone, because we know that 99% of our total body calcium is contained within our bones and our teeth. Aligned to that, of course, if we're talking about calcium, then we should also talk about vitamin D, because the two of them have tended to be researched a great deal together. They work in synergy. So, for example, if we have low vitamin D status, that is likely to have an impact on calcium absorption, because vitamin D status is very important to helping our bodies absorb calcium. And of course, what we know is that vitamin D is critical for bone health, both from a bone density point of view, helping us to keep our bones strong and in sufficient supply of bone mass. But we also know that it's very important for muscular function, because within our bodies, we have what we would call vitamin D receptors. And we have a number of vitamin D receptors in our muscle tissue. And so as a consequence, it's very important not to allow our bodies to be low on vitamin D status throughout our lifetime, but particularly as we get older, because we're going to be more likely perhaps not to get as much vitamin D as what we would do perhaps when we're younger, because perhaps we don't go out as much, or when we do go out, our skin is covered up. And so we don't get such a natural supply of UV light, which is of course our main source of vitamin D. So of course we know between October and March, there is insufficient UV light of the right wavelength to allow us to make vitamin D. So we know in areas of northern latitude, people will be at risk of vitamin D insufficiency or deficiency. So taking your vitamin D supplement, and then of course between April and September, making sure that you get some UV light exposure, about 20 minutes per day, with about 10% of your body exposed, so your face, the backs of your hands and your neck, to allow you to make some vitamin D without any sun cream on or moisture or clothing on that skin that is exposed. So calcium and vitamin D being the two key nutrients that everybody turns to first when we're thinking about musculoskeletal health. But a third one, of course, would be protein. So protein is critical to bone, it's critical to muscle function. And as we get older, we want to make sure that we have really good quality protein in our diet, and that we ensure that we are eating enough in able to support our muscle and bone tissues. There are very important other lifestyle factors other than diet, and one of those is, of course, physical activity. Your body, and in particular your bones, need an impact, and that if we are physically inactive or inert, then what that means is that our bone density won't increase, or that our bone density won't maintain its health. And so it's very important on a daily basis that we walk around, that we give our body that impact load in order for us to ensure that we keep our muscle tone and that we keep our bone density. So physical activity is as important as a really good diet for muscle and bone health. Physical activity that would be beneficial, particularly to muscle and bone, would be impact loading. So exercise that is non-bearing, so for example swimming and cycling, is fantastic for muscular tone, but it wouldn't have an impact on bone density because there's no impact loading. So we wouldn't in any way discourage you from doing that, because from a cardiovascular point of view, from a muscle health point of view, it's very important. But we're really looking for exercise that is conducive to ensuring bone density there is an impact load. Of course, what we would want to do is to have caution that if somebody, as they've got older, that their bone density has declined, so they would be defined not as osteoporotic, i.e. as having osteoporosis, but they would be defined as having osteopenia, which is a low bone mass, but not low enough for it to be below the threshold. Then we would, of course, urge caution that impact loading should be done very carefully. And for example, Tai Chi exercise has been shown to be very helpful to the ageing population in terms of keeping mobile, but of course not doing big exaggerations in exercise could potentially be detrimental to bone if it is very fragile. What we also want to try to do is to avoid what we would kind of call bone thinning aspects. So smoking is a no-no for bone health. So nicotine is directly toxic to bone and is something that we really, want to try to avoid. We also want to be careful on alcohol consumption. In moderation, that is absolutely fine for muscle and bone function, but in excess, we know again that alcohol can be directly toxic to bone cells. So maintaining a really healthy lifestyle, there's been a lot of work that's starting to look into sleep patterns and whether bone is actually controlled by what we would call our circadian clock, and the importance of rest as much as physical activity. I think we've got a lot more to do on the science of that, but absolutely ensuring, a good night's rest is very important. So my 3 top tips for preserving musculoskeletal health. I think number 1 would be to keep active, to keep physically active, and to ensure that you are mobile, that you're using your muscle, that is of course, a hugely important in supporting all our different bones. So physical activity, number 1. Number 2, ensuring that you don't allow yourself to become vitamin D deficient or indeed vitamin D insufficient as you get older. So the best way of ensuring that is to follow the government guidelines which of course say that during the winter we should encourage people to take a vitamin D supplement when you haven't got a great deal of natural UV light. And then the third top tip would be ensuring that you have calcium in enough supply. So physical activity, vitamin D and calcium would be the three key aspects.